Well.
Hello, it's me, Caitlin. I am back. Who knows for how long, but let's just celebrate it for the time being. In the vein of what everybody else is doing, I'm really keen to reflect on 2019, the reading year I had, and my favourites that came out of that year. I am so pleased that I fell in love with reading again, and the online book community is a huge part of that. So thank you to everybody who has enjoyed things and spread positivity and recommended things. Oh, we love it. In total I read 67 books, which is like, girl, I don't know how you did that, but congrats. And from that I've really been lucky enough to take away some new favorite authors, some new favorite all-time books. In fact, I'll do a quick little list before I get into my favorite books of the year, just some new favorite authors for me. A new favorite classics author that I've found for me is John Steinbeck. I read 2 of his books this past year. He is fantastic. Cannot wait to read more. I love Donna Tartt, as basically anybody who knew me and had read Donna Tartt could have told you. Jamie was like, of course you do. Of course you do. And I was like, of course I do. Jay Kristoff is a new great author in my eyes. Fantasy unlike anything I've ever read. Sally Rooney is probably, if I had to call someone my favorite author, it's probably Sally Rooney, and that's after only 2 books and 1 short story. So that just goes to show how incredible her writing is. Taylor Jenkins Reid, bit touch and go with the beginning of her bibliography, but her 2 latest, you will see later in this video, I really enjoyed them, and I will definitely pick up historical fiction in the future by her. So what I thought I'd do to focus on the positives is I'd talk about my favourite books that I read in 2019, not all necessarily new releases. In fact, I don't know that any of them are, maybe some of them are. And then I'd also do a little list of honourable mentions, so books that aren't quite new favourites but I really enjoyed or had something that really spoke to me and that I want to do a little shout out to. So I've got 10 5-star books that are my favourites, and then I've got 10 of those little recommendations. Also going in chronological order of when I read them, because I don't know if I could rank these. The first is, of course, Nevernight. This is not new to the book community. We all know why. It is fantastic, and if you have not yet picked this up, I definitely recommend doing so. I collected the American hardbacks because I really like them, even though nobody else does. Stunning. I seem to be in the minority here, but for me, Nevernight is my favourite of the chronicles thus far. Haven't read Dark Dawn, really looking forward to doing that. Godsgrave though, I know a lot of people prefer Godsgrave. I don't, I definitely prefer Nevernight. Having said that, I was spoiled for Godsgrave, so I'm sure a great deal of its impact, which essentially lies in the last 10 pages and last page for sure, was kind of lost on me. But I still think even if I had been blind going into Godsgrave, I would still prefer Nevernight. I just more prefer this setting. In the first book of a sequence of books, you really are learning alongside the character, and I think there's a real magic that comes with that. Whilst it means, you know, in sequels, when the world is already built, authors have the ability to expand upon that and put our characters in new scenarios because we have that established knowledge, but I do really like the process of learning alongside them. So for me, Nevernight was a real standout. Very clever writing, great originality. Pick it up if you haven't already. Next fantastic book I read that I want to recommend is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Wow, this was my second John Steinbeck. I picked it up because it was small, we love that, and I had read another of his earlier in the year and was really intrigued by it and definitely wanted more, and thank goodness I picked this up. I read it all in about 2 hours one Sunday morning, and I cried, and I went downstairs and I said, Mum, have you read John Steinbeck? And she said yes, and I said, have you read this? She said yes. I was like, this to me is an example of a classic that deals with things that are incredibly problematic, but I think what this does that so many classics don't, I'm talking to you Jack Kerouac, is present things in a subversive light. I think it's very clear when there are instances in this book of ableism or racism that we are in no way encouraged to sympathise with the abuser, the perpetuator of that behaviour. We are instead confronted by how awful it is. And to me, that's not through the lens that we are reading this with today. That's not with our added context today, where we of course know that is abominable behaviour. That is John Steinbeck saying, this is not acceptable behaviour, but I'm presenting it in my book for whatever reason. I recommend giving this a try. I would recommend this actually if you are new to classics as well, because it is short. It's not going to take up a great deal of your time. If you don't like it, you can just put it down, but you shouldn't. It's an example of what classics can do so well, which is to give you a simplistic story that actually has so much going on. The next I read is another short and sweet classic. I didn't read this beautiful edition. I got this recently from the queen herself, Jamie. She gifted it to me because she knows that I loved this book this year, and that is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And can you believe how beautiful this is? And this is only the sleeve. I mean, and there are illustrations. There's a map. Look at how stunning. I already knew that I wanted to reread this, and now I just have the best excuse in the world. I actually picked up this book on recommendation from Jamie, but also on recommendation from one of my other friends who read it and just had a real moment of clarity after reading it and said, you need to read this book. It really reminded me what's important in life and what my purpose is, and how significant it is to be constantly working toward that purpose or in service of that purpose. And I was like, it is an epic, but it feels almost like a fairy tale. A really fantastic story of discovery. A really great protagonist whom we follow has their own voice and own personality, but whose shoes you can really put yourself in. Just a side note, I personally really like going into books not really knowing a great deal about them, so if it seems like I'm really light on synopsis, that's why. It's just my personal approach. I actually think that's a really beneficial way to go into classics, because you can get quite caught up with thinking, oh, it doesn't sound like a lot's going to happen in that story, or oh, that story doesn't sound like it's for me. I think very few classics are about plot. It's about how we get where we are going rather than where we are going. The next has got to be the booktube darling, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo. Read this as part of the TJ read along. What a fun part of 2019 that was, by the way. Thank you to everybody who had a part in that, and of course to the 3 hosts whom I love. This book was fantastic. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I will say this was nothing like I expected. I really thought it was just going to be husband to husband, story to story, and there is a unifying journey throughout her husbands that is just the most unexpected delight. Let me just say that I love women and leave it at that. Here is where my life changed. I read my first Sally Rooney in one Sunday. I read it on a Sunday afternoon. I finished it about 7 o'clock at night, and I literally did not know what to do with myself. I was kind of like, I feel like reading. Didn't know what to read. I could watch something. Didn't know what to watch, and honestly just sat there waiting for my room to go dark around me, having a true crisis. Normal People, Sally Rooney, excellent. Her craftsmanship, her voice, I don't know that I've ever felt closer to something that I'm reading. I felt such a draw to Marianne. To this day, would die on her hill, would protect her with my life. She's one of my new favorite characters. So excited that this has been made into a mini-series that's coming out this year. Probably, I'd say adult fiction, and they do start out young. It's about 2 people and the impact of timing and circumstance on their relationship and love story. As somebody who loves romance and crying, this was perfect for me. I would recommend picking it up even if you're not a romance hoe, even if you're not really liking the sound of it. I think there's so much to be gained from this book as a text, and again, it's not very long. It's not going to take you that long. Give it a try. The next book is Conversations with Friends, also by Sally Rooney. I don't have it with me at the moment because I've lent it to my friend. Oh my gosh, another incredible novel, and that was her debut. I couldn't believe it. Whilst I prefer Normal People, they are both still excellent books. Conversations with Friends is very different. It still does have a similar air about it, a similar melancholic protagonist who feels somewhat disconnected from her context. That's something that I definitely relate to. It's about her relationship with her best friend, who is also her ex-girlfriend, and then a married couple that they encounter and befriend together. Definitely adult fiction. I recommend being in a pretty strong place when you read it, because there could be a lot of triggers in terms of depression and anxiety and abuse. That also actually goes for normal people. Just beware going into it if those are things that are important that you know before you read something. Just be aware of that. Next up, we have this bad boy. I was not expecting much following Evelyn Hugo because I thought, what could possibly follow Evelyn Hugo? This could. I adored Daisy Jones and the Six. It is my favorite of the two if I had to pick. Something about this just got me. It just got me. It's that tragic, romantic timing, circumstance, separation, passion, people who just seem so meant for each other, but the choices they make that might contradict that, and oh my gosh, what a feat this is. Really interesting and experimental format, told all through interviews, which I thought I would find problematic. Didn't at all. Found it perhaps even more engrossing. I'm incredibly excited for the adaptation of this too, especially because Queen Riley Keough is in the lead role. She's got it. She's got the range. Even though this looks like Dakota Johnson, and Dakota could have done it too. Dakota could also be Karen. Casting directors, if you're listening, I worship at the altar of Daisy Jones. Next up is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. So I read 2 of his books this year. I read this and I read Warlight. This won the Booker Prize for fiction. It's completely visible to me why. It comes from something so sumptuous and rich. I just don't even know how I am allowed to exist in a world in which this book exists. The language in this, Michael Ondaatje's grasp on words, I just don't know how he does it. You can see I annotated quite a lot. It was a book that, I'll be honest, I kind of struggled whilst reading this. I thought perhaps it was too dense. It is a very lyrical book. It's not a linear structure. There's a lot of flashbacks. There's a lot that's very different from the film, which I am familiar with. I really like the movie a lot. Ralph Fiennes, Lord Voldemort, thank you King. The book is very different to it. Upon reading reviews afterwards and really sitting with it after I'd finished, I realized that this is one of the most spectacular things I've ever read. If you have the gumption, if you have the, you know, the energy and the desire to pick this up and really be transported, do it. It's not a book I would recommend to everybody. It's really not. You have to be willing to submit yourself to this and just go with his particular style and just let it take you. There's no other way to read this book. You can't fight with it. It's there for you to just passively consume, and I'm so happy that I did, and I could honestly cry thinking about this book. It's so beautiful. I'll just quickly read some passages. She entered the story knowing she would emerge from it feeling she had been immersed in the lives of others, in plots that stretched back 20 years, her body full of sentences and moments as if awakening from a sleep with a heaviness caused by unremembered dreams. Here's another one. For echo is the soul of the voice, exciting itself in hollow places. I have always had information like a sea in me. I am a person who, if left alone in someone's home, walks to the bookcase, pulls down a volume and inhales it. So history enters us. I knew maps of the seafloor, maps that depict weakness in the shield of earth, charts painted on skin that contain the various routes of the Crusades. In the desert, you have time to look everywhere, to theorize on the choreography of all things around you. They're just such interesting and intellectual word choices. The vocabulary of Ondaatje as a writer is just so beyond anything that I have in me. It's so beyond my capacity that I'm just like, damn. To give you a short summary of this, a woman is nursing a burns victim back to health in an abandoned Italian villa toward the end of the Second World War. Her story, his story, and the people that they encounter along the way. Now we get to what y'all came for. The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. A book that if you told me I would give 5 stars, I would say, dunno. But here we are, forever in love with this story. I love Carden so much. I love Jude and Carden so much, and therefore this was the book for me. If you asked me what the perfect YA fantasy book is, I would say this. I really recommend this trilogy. I think it might be the first time for me that in a series my order of preference goes from the last to the first book. So for me, Queen of Nothing 5 stars, Wicked King 4 stars, and then Cruel Prince is probably a 3 or a 3.5, just because I need that Jude and Carden content, alright? The last book on the list definitely took a bit of my heart with it when I finished it. It's probably a new all-time favourite, perhaps even in the spot below The Great Gatsby. Don't think anything could overtake Gatsby for me, but if anything did, it would probably be The Secret History by Donna Tartt. The way I talked about Michael Ondaatje's grasp of writing and language just then, whilst they have different styles, the talent and genius is completely applicable to Donna Tartt. Her artistry, I just cannot believe how fantastic she is. This is her first novel. It's virtually a 700-page epic. The incredible plot of this book, my god. Cannot wait to reread this book and really pay attention now that I know where it's all going. I'm so excited to go into it with new theories in my mind, with points of discussion that I've had with Jamie in my mind, because she is obviously the expert on this book. So much to contemplate, and I'm basically just constantly losing my mind. If you ever see me staring into space, I'm thinking about The Secret History. So those were my favorites of the year, and now a really quick just round off of some books that I really enjoyed as well. I didn't include it in my top 10 because it is a reread, but I of course have to talk about how incredible The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is. This book just speaks to me like no other. I love the story. I really love the movie as well, the Baz Luhrmann film. I don't know how many times I've read The Great Gatsby now. Whilst this may sound cliche, it's true, so I'm just going to say it tells me different things every time. I really get something new from it every time I consume the story, whether it's in the filmic form or the literary form. This edition is one that I've always wanted, so I gifted it to myself. Just to give you an idea of how much I am in awe of this story. That's how tabbed it is. Virtually every page has at least one. In fact, most have several. I also think this is another really great classic to start with. If you're looking for a classic to start with, or you're trying to expand your horizons a bit and read more of them, there's a reason this is one of the most notable classics in the world. It is that good. Maybe if you read it and you weren't a huge fan, or maybe you read it for school or for university, pick it up again. It's not a long book, it's really not. It's less than 200 pages. Personally, part of what makes it different for me every time is that I'm in a different point in my life, and I think maybe if you give it another chance, with time having passed, you might find that you feel differently about it. There's so much at play here. I could probably talk about this forever. Other books I really liked this year, I read Interviews with David Fincher, who was one of my favorite filmmakers, and it was about his movies up till The Social Network, I think, or maybe The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, whichever was most recent. It got up to right before he released Gone Girl. Really interesting to read those. He's just such a fascinating mind to me, and a genius, total genius. I love his work, so that was really cool to read those. I did a reread of The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. It is a true example of distinctive literary voice in a really narrow setting. It's a very sort of what seems like a one-trick pony kind of story, but again, there's so much going on in that. I read The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. That is just beautiful. What a book, what a story. That is probably a near perfect, if not perfect, YA contemporary for me. I thought that was fantastic, and I'm really excited to watch the film. Probably my favorite Christina Lauren of the year was Love and Other Words. I really enjoyed that, and I also really liked Sweet Filthy Boy. If you're wanting just like heavy on the smut, go for that. The Girl He Used to Know was a romance that really took me by surprise. I was just delighted by it. I really appreciated it. I don't deal with some of the issues in that book. For me, it felt like a really good portrayal of those issues. I hope that's the case, because I really enjoyed that book. I cried. I read The Pearl by John Steinbeck. So this was my first John Steinbeck, which then inspired me to read Of Mice and Men. There's a story where I think back on it and I'm like, maybe it is 5 stars. I gave it 4. It's probably like a 4.5 or a 5, to be honest. Again, it seems to be quite simplistic at its core, but what it tells of in terms of the spoils of riches and capitalism and greed and consumerism, just from the simple plot point of one man finding a pearl that is so coveted that he becomes famous for finding it in his village, and kind of chaos ensues is basically what happens. I would really recommend this. Fantastic book. Warlight, which I mentioned earlier when talking about The English Patient, that was the other Michael Ondaatje book that I read. It was magical. It made me laugh. It made me cry. I want to reread it because I ended up reading it over a really long period of time, and I think had I read it more succinctly, it would have been a 5-star, so I'm interested to see whether that holds true. Alongside The Sun is also a star. These would have to be the all-time contemporaries for me. We have Frankly in Love by David Yoon and Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett. I was very kindly sent both of these by Penguin Random House. Look at all the tabs. Frankly in Love, again, everyone kind of knows what it's about at this point. We've got the fake dating trope, we've got Korean American on voices representation. It's funny, it has bite, it has heart. Definitely recommend it. Full Disclosure is about a teenage girl who is living with HIV. Great to read this. I really enjoyed it. I'm so here for people being represented in literature. I want more of these diverse stories, and I really want to read diversely this coming year. Yeah, that was my super rambly and kind of tangential attempt at being philosophical about the books I read last year. Not sure how long this whole booktube resurgence will last, considering now would have been the time to jump on it. Holiday is almost over and I'll be going back to work, so time and energy are sort of up in the air at the moment. Hopefully this was enjoyable to you. I know that everybody's doing their favorites, but personally I really like to bring that positivity and shout out books that mean a lot to me. Maybe I'll make another video and maybe I'll see you in that one. Bye!